Ma'am takes Malachy and me to the St. Vincent de Paul Society to stand at the queue and see if there's any chance of getting something for the Christmas dinner, a goose or a ham. But the man says everyone in Limerick is desperate this Christmas. He gives a redacher for groceries at McGrath's shop and another one for the butcher. No goose, says the butcher, no ham. No fancy items when you bring the docket from the St. Vincent de Paul. What you can have now, missus, is black pudding and tripe, or a sheep's head, or a nice pig's head. No harm in a pig's head, missus. Plenty of meat, and the children love it. Slice that cheek, slather with mustard, and you're in heaven. Though, I suppose they wouldn't have the likes of that now in America, where they're mad for the steak and all classes of poultry, flying, walking, or swimming itself. He tells Ma'am no, she can't have boiled bacon or sausages, but if she has any sense, she'll take the pig's head before they're all gone, the way the poor people of Limerick are clamouring for them. Ma'am said, the pig's head isn't right for Christmas. And he says, 'tis more than the Holy Family had in that cold stable in Bethlehem long ago. You wouldn't find them complaining if someone offered them a nice fat pig's head. No, they wouldn't complain, says Ma'am, but they never ate the pig's head because they were Jewish. And what does that have got to do with it? A pig's head is a pig's head, and a Jew is a Jew, and 'tis against the religion, and I don't blame him. The butcher says, are you a bit of an expert, missus, on the Jews and the pig? I am not, says Ma'am, but there was a Jewish woman, Mrs. Leibovitz, in New York, and I don't know what we would have done without her. The butcher takes the pig's head off a shelf, and when Malachy says, oh, look at the dead dog, the butcher and Ma'am burst out laughing. He wraps the head in newspaper, hands it to Ma'am and says, Happy Christmas. Then he wraps up some sausages and tells her, take them sausages now for your breakfast on Christmas Day. And Ma'am says, oh, I can't afford sausages. And he says, am I asking for money, am I? Take them sausages, they might have to make up for the lack of a goose or a ham. Sure, you don't have to do that, says Ma'am. I know that, missus. If I had to do it, I wouldn't. Ma'am says she's a pain in her back that I'll have to carry the pig's head. I hold it against my chest, but it's damp. And when the newspaper begins to fall away, everyone can see the head. Ma'am says, I'm ashamed of me life that the world should know we're having pig's head for Christmas. Boys from Leamy's National School see me, and they point and they laugh. Oh, God, look at Frankie McCourt in his pig snout. Is that what the eggs ate for Christmas dinner, Frankie? One calls to another, hey, Christy, do you know how they ate the pig's head? No, I don't, Paddy. You grab him by the ears and chew the face off him. And Christy says, hey, Paddy, do you know the only part of the pig that the McCourts don't eat? No, I don't, Christy. The only part they don't eat is the oink. After a few streets, the newspaper has gone altogether, and everyone can see the pig's head. His nose is flat against my chest and pointing up to my chin, and I feel sorry for him because he's dead and the world is laughing at him. My sister and two brothers are dead too, but if anyone laughed at them, I'd bait it with a rock. I wish Dad would come and help us because Ma'am has to stop every few steps and lean against the wall. She's holding her back and telling us she'll never be able to climb Barrack Hill. Even if Dad came, he wouldn't be much use because sure, he never carries anything. Parcels, bags, packages. If you carry such things, you lose your dignity. That's what he says. He carried the twins when they were tired and he carried the Pope. But that's not the same as carrying ordinary things like a pig's head. He tells Malachy and me, when you grow up, you have to wear a collar and tie and never let people see you carry things. He's upstairs, sitting by the fire, smoking a cigarette, reading the Irish Press, which he loves because it's De Valera's paper. And he thinks De Valera is the greatest man in the world. He looks at me and the pig's head and tells Ma'am it's a disgraceful thing to let a boy carry an object like that through the streets of Limerick. She takes off her coat and eases herself into the bed and tells him that next Christmas he can go out and find a dinner. As she's worn out and gasping for a cup of tea, somebody dropped his grand airs, boil the water for the tea and fry some bread before his two small sons starve to death. On Christmas morning, he lights the fire early so we can have sausages and bread and tea. Mam sends me to Granny to see if we can borrow a pot for the pig's head. Granny says, "What are you having for your dinner? Pig's head? Jesus, Mary and Joseph, that's going to be all, to be honest. Couldn't your father go out and get a ham or a goose at least? What kind of a man is he at all? Mam puts the head into the pot, just covered with water, and while the pig is boiling away, Dad takes Malachy and me up to the Mass in the Redemptorist Church. It's warm in the church, and sweet with flowers and incense and candles. He takes us to see the baby Jesus in the crib. He's a big fat baby with fair curls like Malachy. Dad tells us that's Jesus' mother there, Mary, see her, in the blue dress, and his father, St. Joseph, the old man with the beard. He says they're sad because they know Jesus is going to grow up and be killed so we can all go to heaven. I ask him why the baby Jesus has to die. And Dad says, you can't ask questions like that. And Malachy says, why? And Dad tells him, be quiet. Mam is in a terrible state at home. There isn't enough coal to cook the dinner. The water isn't boiling anymore, and she says she's demented of worry. We'll have to go down to the dock road again to see if there's any coal or turf lying around from the lorries. Surely we'll find something on the road to save all days. Even the poorest of the poor don't go out on Christmas Day picking coal off the road. There's no use asking Dad to go because he'll never stoop that low, and even if he did, he won't carry things through the streets. It's a rule he has. And Mam can't go because of the pain in her back. She says, you'll have to go, Frank, and take Malachy with you. It's a long way to the dock road, but we don't mind because our bellies are filled with sausages and bread, and it's not raining. We carry a canvas bag that Mam borrowed from Mrs. Hannah next door. And Mam is right. There's no one on the dock road. The poor are all at home having pig's head or maybe a goose, and we have the dock road to ourselves. We find bits of coal and turf stuck in the cracks in the road and in the walls of the coal yards. We find bits of paper and cardboard that will be useful in starting the fire again. We're wandering around trying to fill the bag when Pa Keating comes along. He must have washed himself for Christmas because he's not as black as he was when Eugene died. He wants to know what we're doing with the bag, and when Malachy tells him, he says, Jesus, Mary, and Holy St. Joseph, Christmas Day, and you don't have a fire for your pig's head? That's a bloody disgrace. He takes us to South's pub, which is not supposed to be open, but he's a regular customer, and there's a back door for men who want their pint to celebrate the birth of the baby Jesus above in the crib. He orders his pint and lemonade for us and asks the man, is there any chance of getting a few lumps of coal? The man says he's been serving drink for 27 years and nobody ever asked him for coal before. Pa says, it'll be a favour. And the man says, if Pa asked for the moon, he'd fly up and bring it back down to him. The man leads us to the coal hole under the stairs and tells us to take what we can carry. It's real coal and not bits from the dock road. And if we can't carry it, sure, we can drag it along the ground. It takes us a long time to go from South's pub to Barrackhill because of a hole in the bag. See, I pull the bag, and it's Malachy's job to pick up the lumps that fall through the hole and put them back in again. Then it starts to rain, and we can't stand in the doorway till it passes because we have to have that coal. And it's leaving a black trail along the pavement, and Malachy is turning black from picking up the lumps, pushing them into the bag, and wiping the rain from his face with his wet black hands. I tell him he's black, and he tells me I'm black, and a woman in the shop tells us, get away from the door, just Christmas Day, and she doesn't want to be looking at Africa. We have to keep dragging the bag or we never have our Christmas dinner. It'll take ages for the fire to get going, and ages more to get our dinner, because the water has to be boiling when Man puts in the head of cabbage and the potatoes to keep the pig company in the pot. We drag the bag up O'Connell Avenue, and we see people in their houses sitting around tables with all kinds of decorations and bright lights. At one house, they push up the window, and the children point and laugh and call to us, look at the Zulus, where are your spears? Malachy makes faces at them and wants to throw coal at them, but I tell him If he throws coal, there'll be less for the pig and we'll never get our dinner. The downstairs in our house is a lake again from the rain pouring in under the door. But it doesn't matter because we're drenched anyway and we just wade through the water. Dad comes down and drags the bag upstairs to Italy. He says we're good boys for getting so much coal that the dock road must have been covered with it. When Mam sees us, she starts to laugh. And then she cries. She's laughing because we're so black and crying because we're sopping wet. She tells us to take off all our clothes and she washes the coal off our hands and our faces. She tells Dad that the pig's head can wait a while before we have a nice hot cup of tea. It's raining outside and there's a lake downstairs in our kitchen. But up here in Italy, the fire is going again and the room is so dry and warm that after our tea, Malachy and I doze off in the bed and we don't wake till Dad tells us the dinner is ready. Our clothes are still wet, so Malachy sits on the trunk at the table, wrapped in Mam's red American overcoat, and I'm wrapped in an old coat that Mam's father left behind when he went to Australia. Oh, there are delicious smells in the room, cabbage and potatoes and the pig's head. But when Dad lifts the head from the pot to a plate, Malachy says, "Oh, the poor pig! I don't want to eat the poor pig!" And Mam says, "If you're hungry, you'll eat. I don't stop the nonsense and eat your dinner." Dad says, "Wait a minute." He takes slices from the two cheeks, places them on our plates, and smears them with mustard. He takes the plate that holds the pig's head and puts it on the floor under the table. "Now," he says to Malachy, "that's ham." And Malachy eats it because he's not looking at where it came from and it isn't pig's head anymore. Oh, the cabbage is soft and hot, and there are plenty of potatoes with butter and salt. Man peels our potatoes, but Dad eats his skin and all. He says all the nourishment of a potato is in the skin. And Mam says it's a good thing he's had eaten eggs, he'd be chewing the shells and all. He says he would. And it's a disgrace that the Irish throw out millions of potato skins every day, and that's why thousands are dying of consumption. And surely there's nourishment in the shell of an egg, since waste is the eighth deadly sin. If he eat his way, and Mam says, "Never mind your way, and eat your dinner." He eats half a potato with the skin on and puts the other half back into the pot. He eats a small slice of the pig's cheek and a leaf of cabbage and leaves the rest in his plate for Malachy and me. He makes more tea and we can have that with bread and jam so no one can say we didn't have a sweet on Christmas Day. It's dark now and still raining outside, and the coal is glowing in the grate where Mam and Dad sit and smoke their cigarette. There's nothing to do when your clothes are wet, but get back into bed when it's cozy, and your father can tell you a story about how Cuchulainn became a Catholic, and your father sleep and dream about the pig standing in the crib at the Redemptorist Church, crying because he and the baby Jesus and Cuchulainn all have to grow up and die.
That was an extract from Angela's Ashes, written by Frank McCourt. The piece was titled Christmas Time, and tonight it was read by Declan Cahill.
One of the more grisly rituals of my youth was the annual Christmas pudding visit. Although it had nothing to do with religion, this was a penitential pilgrimage that should have qualified for at least a plenary indulgence. It was unremitting gloom from start to finish. It took place every Christmas Eve in an unending hour between breakfast and dinner. My mother, God love her, was a kind woman who forgave readily and very seldom lost her temper. However, something strange always happened to her on the occasion of the pudding visit. She ceased to be the gentle lady of the rest of the year and became instead a bristling, barking sergeant major. Before setting out, we children were lined up in the hall and inspected faces, hands, teeth, ears, and shoes. This was usual and didn't bother us very much. But we also had to smile. "What are we?" Mother barked.
Happy, Mammy!
"And what are we going to do?"
Enjoy ourselves.
And how will people know we're enjoying ourselves?
We're going to smile.
Well, come on, show me. Her face is contracted into a fixed stimulation of a smile. All right. But if I see as much of a hint of a... The threat was left unfinished, but it hung ominously in the air as we marched out the door and down the street. Thus began the annual Christmas pudding visit to the Three Witches of Duncan Road. All names have been changed to protect the innocent. Our first stop was at Mrs. Dooley's house, next door to our own. Mrs. Dooley was a large woman with a green apron, a pimple on her nose, and a cat called Oscar. She made grey pudding. I don't know how she managed that, though my father, who incidentally never came on these visits, insisted that Mrs. Dooley wouldn't waste stout on any pudding while she had him out on her. Eating Mrs. Dooley's pudding was very difficult. Grey is not the most attractive of food colours, but eat it we had to and wash it down with tepid, flat lemonade. Sometimes, when the grown-ups weren't looking, we tried to feed the pudding to Oscar, but the cat, with more sense than loyalty, absolutely refused to have anything to do with it. Somehow, we survived the ordeal. And what do we say to Mrs. Dooley?
Thank you, Mrs. Dooley.
The next stop was 5 doors further on, to the home of Mrs. Dunn. Smile!
Happy Christmas, Mrs. Dunn.
Mrs. Dunn was small and bird-like and always wore black. My father said that this was because there had been 2 earlier, now later, Mr. Dunns. Mrs. Dunn made purple pudding. Even my father could offer no likely explanation for this remarkable feat, though he did manage to infer that it had something to do with the passing of the 2 Mr. Dunns. In this house, there wasn't even a budgie, so the purple pudding had to be eaten in its entirety. The big problem was it tasted purple, and there was a genuine difficulty forcing it to follow Mrs. Dooley's grey pudding. By the time the Dunn visit ended, her spirits were really flagging.
Thank you, Mrs. Dunn.
Smile!
We are smiling, Mammy.
I've never seen a smile like that before.
It's a purple smile.
Wait till I get you home. The journey across the road to Mrs. Doyle was the final assault on the summit of Everest. Mrs. Doyle smoked a lot of cigarettes, and I'm sure she swore when there was no children around. She was square, she had vivid red hair, and she made black concrete pudding. This was the hardest of all to get down after the grey and the purple. It stuck in our teeth, it lurked in the crannies of our mouth, and it hurt our gums. We struggled manfully while Mrs. Doyle smoked and my mother coughed. Finally, it was over.
Thank you, Mrs. Doyle. Happy Christmas.
We trudged solemnly back across the road.
Mammy,
What?
can we stop smiling now?
You have just been listening to the annual Christmas pudding visit, which was written by Michael Judge. Tonight it was read by Claire Flanagan with the assistance of Noel Kavanagh.
"'Twas the night before Christmas, when all through the house not a creature was stirring, not even a mouse. The stockings were hung by the chimney with care, in hopes that St. Nicholas soon would be there. The children were nestled all snug in their beds, while visions of sugar plums danced in their heads. And Mamma in her kerchief, and I in my cap, had just settled down for a long winter's nap. When out on the lawn there arose such a clatter, I sprang from the bed to see what was the matter. Away to the window I flew like a flash, tore open the shutters and threw up the sash. The moon on the breast of the new fallen snow gave the lustre of midday to objects below. When, what to my wondering eyes should appear, but a miniature sleigh and 8 tiny reindeer, with a little old driver so lively and quick, I knew in a moment it must be Saint Nick. More rapid than eagles, his curses they came, and he whistled and shouted and called them by name. Now Dasher, now Dancer, now Prancer and Vixen, on Comet, on Cupid, on Donner and Blitzen, to the top of the porch, to the top of the wall, now dash away, dash away, dash away all. As dry leaves that before the wild hurricane fly, when they meet with an obstacle, mount to the sky. So up to the housetops the curses they flew, with the sleigh full of toys, and St. Nicholas too. And then, in a twinkling, I heard on the roof the prancing and pawing of each little hoof. As I drew in my hand and was turning around, down the chimney St. Nicholas came with a bound. He was dressed all in fur from his head to his foot, and his clothes were all tarnished with ashes and soot. A bundle of toys he had flung on his back, and he looked like a peddler just opening his pack. His eyes, how they twinkled, his dimples, how merry. His cheeks were like roses, his nose like a cherry. His droll little mouth was drawn up like a bow, and the beard of his chin was as white as the snow. The stump of a pipe he held tight in his teeth, and the smoke it encircled his head like a wreath. He had a broad face and a little round belly that shook when he laughed like a bowl full of jelly. He spoke not a word, but went straight to his work, and filled all the stockings, then turned with a jerk, and lay his finger at the side of his nose, and giving a nod, up the chimney he rose. He sprang to his sleigh, to his team gave a whistle, and away they all flew like the down of a thistle. But I heard him exclaim, ere he drove out of sight, "Happy Christmas to all, and to all a good night."
That was Fran Keogh reading that classic Christmas poem, "'Twas the Night Before Christmas," which was written by Clement Clark Moore.